I wanted to ask, by show of hands, how many people took part in the Global Advocacy Agenda when it was first created? Because I'm not sure how many people in the room may be aware. Okay, that's excellent. So I wanted to give a brief introduction to what this is for those people who maybe weren't part of it, and give a framing for what we're doing here. And I will try to do this in 30 seconds or less so that we can get right to the questions. And I think that will be okay because you have a copy of this that you can take home with you. But essentially what we did as people living with HIV is we worked our best to engage as many other positive people around the world as we could in conversations about what agenda we would have as positive people for what needs to happen next. And we did this, did we do this in 2012? I think we must, and so it's the 2013 to 2015 agenda. And we organized around three pillars: access to treatment, care, and support, human rights, and community strengthening, community organizing, community mobilization. And the idea was that community mobilization is actually needed to make the other two pillars happen. There were a number of really important points that came up from different dialogues around the world. These are reflected in this beautiful little book that you have here. What you'll see in here is a list of things that are really critically important for people living with HIV that no one organization could ever possibly do on its own. And so the idea was that different networks of people living with HIV and different partner organizations would take on different areas of this agenda according to their competencies. And so what we've seen today are just some examples of ways that people have worked with these different areas in the Global Advocacy Agenda to try to move the agenda forward. And so what we're interested in now would be questions for the speakers, and also any success stories or ways that you may have worked or your organizations may have worked with the different areas in the Global Advocacy Agenda.
Thank you. We have our first speaker over there, I think.
Hi, greetings to everyone. I'm Trey Alexander. I'm from the United States. I'm a public health consultant, but I also work in prison linkages. The group that I work with most is folks that have been incarcerated who either test positive before they go to jail or while they're there. And I did get a chance to look within the Global Advocacy book, and I did see, thankfully, prisoners listed. But I do realize that when I come into a lot of settings, that particular population is not really discussed. And for us to be thinking about advocacy and thinking about our key populations, this is the one population where I don't always see any representation, them being at the table, and they're fraught with many barriers, especially coming home. You have folks that want to come back home to their communities and reintegrate successfully, but there's so many barriers thrown in their face already to come home, and then to be HIV positive and come back home and be in situations where they don't have housing, they don't have access to any type of way to employ themselves. My question to all of the beautiful panelists is, within the work that you've done, where are men and women that have been incarcerated included in your work, and how are you engaging them in a meaningful way so that their voices are heard when you do come into forums like this?
All right, thank you. Can we take all three of the questions so that we can then have scatter response? Yeah?
And then people can come up and...
Yeah, and then people can come up and respond as they feel. I know this wonderful woman.
Hi, I'm Jane Bruning from Positive Women in New Zealand. I have a comment and a question. And please don't take my comment as an offence in any sense at all. I guess since we're talking about global advocacy, this is more of some helpful feedback, I hope. But one of the things that when you go out and do advocacy work, often you find you have a very limited time to say what you have to say. And today we were supposed to have be finished by 7:30 on the presentations, and it's 8:15. And it's really important. I mean, having worked on the PCB myself, when we get, on the NGO PCB for the UNAIDS, we get 3 minutes to say our message. And I think it's really important for us to learn that we need to say things quickly, precisely, and clearly, and in a very short amount of time. So I think we need, as a community, to work on our presentations in that regard. So yes. Please, no offence, that was just... and I've seen it happen so often, and we'll lose our message if we don't say it more clearly. So my second, the question was to the Asia Pacific on the research. I noticed that it was for the the Asia and Pacific, and the Pacific wasn't there. And I'd really like to ask what is going to be, what are we going to do about this? Because, we talk about leaving no one behind, and we know that the Pacific are really left out in everything to do with Asia Pacific. So how are we going to get these communities involved and make sure their voices are heard? Thank you.
Thank you. And the next.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm from Indonesia. I'm people living with HIV. I'm young people living with HIV in Indonesia. Actually, I would like to ask for this issue from the APN Plus. Actually, we have the lost in translation, the report from the APN Plus, who developed APN Plus and the UNESCO and then UNICEF at Asia Pacific. I think it's a really good report, but I think that that for my country, Indonesia is left behind for young people living with HIV programs at the Asia Pacific. That's why actually, so as a network, as a Pacific network, what we can do for what we can do as the alliance to urge the country level to have the young strategy for young people living with HIV positive at the country level. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you to all those three panels. I'm just going to say, before we actually ask panelists whether they want to respond, I was just going to say that I think, Jane, your point about the 3-minute elevators thing is something we really do need to take on in terms of our community building and our community mobilisation, and hopefully we can work with you so that you can start to give us masterclasses from your time on the PCB, because it is so important. But, which of the...
So I think that Cecilia had some responses. I'm wondering if other people who were on the panels had responses, and it's a little bit unwieldy, but perhaps we can ask you to come up to the mic and we'll step aside and respond to those.
So I wear many hats. One of the hats that I wear is I belong to the board of directors of an organization called Just Detention International, and it's an organization that focuses on ending sexual violence for the incarcerated populations. And I mentioned many times, during my elevator speech, a lot of times is human rights stops at the bar, and not that many people talk about human rights behind bars, including access to HIV testing and care, or linkage back to care when they are released. And these are issues that are very specific, but it's also cross over to other key populations, such as transgender women, and also to drug users. That those are the kind of stories that we will hear all the time. For the transgender communities, there's no specific organizings for positive trans women, but there is an organization that is led by formerly incarcerated transgender people for transgender people, and they actually get a good response rates in terms of those who are still incarcerated writing back to them and asking for different type of advocacy. And I think that is another, thank you, Tree, for reminding me that that's actually another examples of why it's important to strengthen communities and why we need to really reach out and provide resources. That's the part, provide resources. We don't just go out and say that we'll support you, but help them build, their own community and help them amplify their voice. Thanks.
Can I just add to that, Trey, as I'm sure you know because you're working on the stigma index in the States, that it's one of the populations that we really wanted to include in the stigma index studies. And there are 2 or 3 countries around the world where those country networks have actually managed to do the work inside the prisons. And we know how difficult that is. And also, the HIV Justice Network and Zero Project, have really done some fabulous work with working with people who are incarcerated because of criminalisation. Lots of questions to APN.
Just quickly on Pacific and why it's not part of, it's all right. The study, 2 reasons. Basically, APN sent out an invitation to all the partner networks across 30 countries in the region, and there were no interest from some of our partners in Pacific, but there is no excuse about it. it is true that Asia Pacific networks sometimes tend to overlook the region by, I think basically what they're used to doing, getting more engaged with South Asians and so forth. So we did miss out on. It took us a while to realize actually we can't call it Pacific anymore. We took that out a year later. When we designed this study, we did seek out advices from what are the key things that could be included from also our partners in the Pacific region. And this is one of the pillars of our database, which I didn't go into detail because of the time limitation. And there are other non-quantitative studies and documentation that we've encouraged our networks from the Pacific region to come up with. And we had a conference called Community Access to Treatment, Care and Support Conference last month. It was huge, 100 people for us. And we had members from most of the Pacific countries who showed interest to be part of this broader database, or what we call it web portal in the long run. With young people in HIV, as you're aware, APN Plus provides incubation to new networks coming into existence and getting strengthened. And one of the proud stories has been the Youth Lead Network that we've supported for a while. And now they've recently been independent, which is a very proud moment for us. And we have been consistently trying to encourage young people to raise their voice in a very independent manner. This study overlooked this. I've been chased a lot of times on why we don't have involvement of adolescents in the past. It's a way forward for us. In phase 2, maybe we'll include some of the indicators and focus on this population as well. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. I'm going to, because we've heard from an awful lot of the regions, I know we haven't heard from Latin and South America, but we have heard from, but we had somebody who we wanted to try and squeeze in to talk a few minutes about where the epidemic is very, very big, and that was our colleague from ECU.
Good morning, my name is Ola Alexandrova. I'm actually from Ukraine, but I represent here the East Europe and Central Asia Union of people living with HIV. We are the regional networks of people living with HIV in East Europe and Central Asia, and it unites 16 organizations from 16 countries in the region. And our main goal now is to advocate for scaling up access to treatment and services in our region. And the situation now is that our region is a region with the fastest growing HIV epidemic in the world, and access to treatment as of 2012 was only 25%. And main donor supporting IRT procurement for almost entire region, the Global Fund, is phasing out its current funding, and there is a high risk of interruptions in procurements and services provision in our region when it comes. Also, stigma and discrimination towards people living with HIV in medical settings was reduced, but it still exists, and legislation in some countries is a very big barrier for access to treatment for key affected populations. For example, in Russia, substitution therapy is forbidden for IDUs, and it creates a lot of problems for services provision and IRT treatment for them. Also, there is a lack of researchers and data on the regional level. Okay?
Yeah, I think, because I think the important thing is that, it's useful to hear voices from all the regions, number one. Number two, I would really point you to the fact that despite there being a civil war going on in the Ukraine, and all of that, is that the All-Ukrainian Network, for example, have managed to do the stigma index for the second time. Yeah. There will be a poster exhibition on that on Thursday. So, once again, it doesn't matter what is thrown at us as people living with HIV. We survive and we work. And I think, that is just, so wonderful about, what is happening in an incredibly difficult situation. I think that with the things that are happening in the Ukraine, I think you deserve all our support, in fact, that you're still working. You're still working.
Thank you very
And I
much
think
for
that's-
your support.
Yeah, absolutely. But
Thank you.
just to finish off, I'm going to give the floor for the last few minutes to, if she wants it. But if she, okay.
Could I say something?
Well, yeah, and I think it's Laurel.
I have just two quick things, if I could. One is a plug.
Okay.
No, but really, so a few of us are on the NGO delegation to the UNAIDS Program Coordinating Board, and we are having a community session at 2:30 today in Clarendon D. And if any of you could be there, I urge you to, because the more that people living with HIV and all of our diversity can be at that meeting, the more you can help us shape what we say when we go to UNAIDS and in the other work that we do. And then I had another, just quickly, I just wanted to say that I think this was one of the most amazing panels that any of us will be part of, and that there will be a lot of conversation in the other panels, and people will be agonizing over questions that many of the answers are already here, and we've just talked about them here. And so I urge people not to hold back when you have things to share in those panels. Please share from your own experience and what you know as people who work with these networks.
Okay.
Moving forward.
And
Sorry,
in closing,
and Julian would like me to stop.
I know, and in closing, all I was going to say is that of course, we all come from communities as well as being people living with HIV. So we're also going to be in the youth space. We're also going to be in the IDU space. We're also going to be in our regional spaces. But the PLHIV networking zone that GMP is hosting on your behalf is a space for you to use. Please come, sign our postcards, use the message boards there. Do whatever you like. Really do. If you want to post things that you're doing during the week, use it. Also use our wonderful, terribly overworked, overburdened, but wonderful comms person, Victoria, if you want to get messages out. She's standing there, assisted by Yemi as well. So, they're both resources for you to use, because that's all we can do. Thank you ever so much for coming here today. I hope to see you all through the week, and I hope to see you at a wonderful poster that this man here will be giving tomorrow morning, Eddie, who will be talking about the Leadership Through Accountability Programme, which GMP did for 5 years in partnership with 10 African countries, that shows you what PLHIV can do in terms of gathering data for advocacy and then doing the advocacy in an incredibly cost-effective way. That's going to be a great presentation, so talk to this man afterwards. Thank you all so much for coming. I think you all deserve a big round of applause. Thank you.